Um, Laura and I have some stuff in common, and we have some stuff that is not in common. Laura's an abundance activator. Is that right, Laura?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've done Laura's 1-year program, which was actually pretty amazing. And as I said to Janet earlier, it made me engage with some stuff that I probably would not have engaged with otherwise. And that was a really good thing. But what Laura and I have in common is that we both had some trauma in our childhood. And what we don't have in common is that my marriage went to divorce and Laura's hasn't. And Laura apparently has some secrets she's going to share with us today as to what she, and I imagine also your husband, Laura, did together to create something wonderful in your marriage rather than something that ended in divorce. So let's start the conversation.
Let's go.
What was it you wanted to tell us? Because you did say that there was something you've never shared before in public, and when I saw that, I was pretty excited.
Well, what would you like to know?
Well, what if you were going to sort of sum it up in a few words, or in 20 minutes even, what would you say to somebody whose marriage was going really not at all well, and they wanted to turn it, to get it back on track, if you like?
Right. That's a big question. I think maybe we should start with some context. I feel like we need to
some
context. Because for anyone who hasn't met me, maybe a little introduction would be good. And a little bit of background. And yeah. I think I'd like to start there because that's quite a big thing. So what I would like to share is that I've been with my husband for 23 years, been together since we were 22, and got married about 7, I think we were together about 7 years before we got married. We have 2 children, but also I come from divorce. So I came from 2 parents who had a very messy divorce. That was a very, traumatic and difficult experience for me. And obviously I spent a huge amount of time trying to understand what happened, why everything went completely tits up. And essentially what I hadn't quite realized is that there was a core question that was running me ever since then, which was, what happened? Why did it happen? And how do I prevent that from happening? So this really initiated a very deep, long, and slow and painful healing journey that I'm still on, and kind of inspired me into wanting to becoming a healer, to becoming a coach, to wanting to help people essentially not experience the pain and problems that I did, or help people to prevent the pain and problems that I experienced. So my whole life has really been run from those questions. You could call it it's not pain avoidance, it was like pain protection. And what I saw, what I witnessed with my parents was the problems that happened because they didn't address issues earlier on. So it was like by the point where it had kind of fell apart, it had gone too far. It's a little bit like health. It's like someone sort of gets, severe ill health, but we also need to think about, health, the sort of illness prevention. So I call it preventative medicine. So what do we need to be doing ahead of time to give our bodies the greatest chance for health? And it's the same with our relationship. And usually by the point that people are on that brink of divorce, for some relationships, it's going to be too late. It's going to be it's too far, So my big thing is preventative medicine, and how do we set up for success, which requires like a consciousness and a mindfulness. So that's the first thing I want to say, is that where everything I do and how I am, where it's come from experiencing a lot of pain and trauma that from my point of view didn't need to happen in that way. It did, because there was lack of information, and I don't say that with any judgment or criticism. It's just that the pain that I experienced, I then was like, right, how do we not do that?
Yeah, right.
So when I entered into my relationship, I was 22 years old when I fell in love with Joby. I was not planning to, be with him for into my future. It was, we were in our early 20s. We were just like in the moment. We were just having a really good time. And I, to be honest, I wasn't thinking he was the one I was going to end up with. I thought I'd never get married. I was really like not into the institution of marriage. I wasn't like down with kind of any of that. So it's kind of interesting. I feel in some way I sort of like fell into my relationship, and then I fell pregnant at 26, like completely unplanned. And for me, I felt that was 100% the right thing to do, to go forward with my pregnancy. But I still was very much like fumbling through the present moment. And it kind of, our relationship grew and evolved over time. But one of the things that when we experience, problems in our relationship or issues in our relationship, one thing that I wanted to make sure that I was doing was like leaving no stone unturned. So I'd witnessed, what I've witnessed, right? For people very close to me, other people, is like we kind of tend to like to point the finger and blame and shame and make the other person wrong, and that our shit doesn't stink, right? And one thing I did learn was like, we have blind spots to ourselves. So I became very committed to making sure that like I was doing the work on myself that was creating or part of the problem. So I understood, at least logically, that like the pain and problems that were happening in my relationship also included me, right? Yeah. Even though it's quite easy to project outwards. I think our eyes go out, we see out, we don't see in. So it's quite hard to see. We have big blind spots, but essentially I was fiercely committed to like leaving no stone unturned in our relationship and facing and addressing issues. And I think it's been a long and slow and painful road to like get to be in the relationship we have now, which I think is extraordinary. I'm incredibly proud of us and the relationship we have now, but it's absolutely come from, a lot of work and a lot of hard work and painful work as well, which means addressing problems as they come up and arise. And it's something that's like grown and evolved over time. But one thing that I recognized quite early on is that I always had one foot out the door. I hadn't realized that I had commitment issues until my husband proposed to me. And we'd already had a baby. She was 18 months. I was all in with being a mother, and it was an incredibly powerful and profound healing experience for me, and beautiful. But when he proposed to me, do you know what the very first thought that came into my head was? I can always get a divorce. Like that was literally the first thought that came into my head. And then I said, yes, but like one foot out the door. And what was so interesting is so much came up around getting married. One, I thought I'd never get married. Like I said, I wasn't into the institution of marriage. I'm a bit of a freedom fighter. I wasn't really down for being like tied forevermore. And so our joke was like, around our vows were very like, there's a lot of space in the vows, let's just say that. But I hadn't realized until the lead up to our wedding that what a huge issue with commitment I had. And that I wasn't all in, and I hadn't really realized that. So then my next step was sort of like getting all in, which means really being willing to be all in to working with this relationship as a vehicle for healing, as a vehicle for growth, as a vehicle for evolution. But it took me a little while to get there. And then we've gone on sort of many stages and phases. So that's just what I kind of want to say as the caveat before we go into like dealing with issues present day, because it's been like everything I want to share and say. One, I've learned the hard way, from my childhood experience, but I've also learned the hard way through a lot of trial and error through being the same human being for 23 years, which I think is quite remarkable.
I think it's pretty remarkable too.
I still can't quite believe it. So the commitment to doing the work and doing my work and understanding that if there is a problem in our relationship, there's also a problem inside of me. that's co-creating this relationship,
Yes.
even if I can't see it. So I have to also go, all right. So what I sort of can see sometimes is we think like the grass is always greener. And one thing I've noticed with some people going from relationship to relationship to relationship is I've noticed that like, really what I'd say is wherever you go, there you are, right? Wherever you go, there you are. Meaning we can think that I'm going to leave, that person's the problem or that relationship's the problem. And then what I've seen people do is they basically enter a new relationship with a new human being, manifesting the same problems.
Of course, because you're still the same person in that new relationship, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah. And you're still going to be unconsciously attracted to or magnetized towards similar things.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. So I watched that, I've witnessed that and been like, oh my God. So I could think, oh, he's the problem. Someone over there would be better. Like the grass is always greener. But what I did know, at least part of me knew that if I don't work my shit, if I don't do my inner work, I'm going to unconsciously create the same problem in another relationship. Not necessarily right away, not necessarily like immediately, but over time. Unless I shift my inner game, the outer game won't shift. So this is something that I knew, and it's been honestly horrendously painful because it's much easier to blame someone else. It's much easier to point the finger. It's much easier to say you are the problem. I'm clearly not the problem. Or we can see the problem outside of ourselves, but we can't see ourselves because we have beautiful blind spots. And this is like for me, the gift or the invitation of any relationship, that there's an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity to heal. There's an opportunity to evolve. There's an opportunity to grow if you have two people that are willing to do that work together.
Yeah.
So that's just a bit of like a lead up to kind of get to the place where we want to talk about ways to navigate, because honestly, I've like, been dragged through this a bit kicking and screaming at times with a huge amount of resistance. I didn't want to do this journey. Do you know what I mean? Like part of me, I said it was one foot out the door. So I've learned this the hard way. So I want to just say that everything that I share comes from a lot of like unlearning, like learning and unlearning and trial and error and failure. So it's not like, I really want to get out of this idea of sort of perfection or, like, you know what I mean? Just bring it kind of raw and real and honest.
Yeah, perfection isn't a thing, is it? I mean,
no. So yeah, I think by the time, like coming back to your original questions, like when someone's, really, really struggling in relationship, like there's already like a big buildup of a lot of stuff when you've got to that point, right?
And it's not just what's going on in this relationship, is it? It's also what was happening in your parents' relationship and all those patterns we kind of created as children. I don't know about you, Lara, but for me, it's noticing all the things I was doing in my marriage, which is now over, and now avoiding them in my current relationship, because I know they were destroying me and him and the marriage. And I don't know if it's the same for you, but that was my experience, was like you said, unlearning and then learning something new. I think it's been really important.
Yeah, we have like so many kind of hardwired patterns and programs and a way of being that we learn like at very, very young ages and stages. And there's habits and there's ways of being that we don't even realize. They're kind of like on default.
Yeah.
And they're either patterns that like ways that you developed to get what your needs met, right? Or to get love or whatever, or to protect yourself against hurt and harm. Yeah. And so we go into relationships with like so much entanglement, right? Around love, either trying to get it, like to get our needs met, or to protect ourselves, right? So we're in this weird, like push-pull, hot, cold, like there's a lot that's kind of running us in relationship.
Yeah.
In any kind of relationship. And then you go through life and you start having relationships, and maybe failed ones or ones where there's hurt and harm. So that there's always like, oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, I don't want to do that, right? You're trying to like either protect or buffer. But if we don't process, or if we're not like healing what's going on, right, we just end up taking, it's like all that baggage, we take that baggage and then that baggage and then that baggage, and we've got this like house of pain on our backs as we enter new relationships. And then that relationship starts to build baggage and pain and problems. And we tend to just like just load it on and load it on and load it on. And then we're like, why are we cracking now? Like, why are we actually cracking? So I think that's the thing, is to understand that when we're at that point, there is a whole shit ton of baggage and a whole shit ton of pain that is a buildup that needs to be sifted through and worked through. So, but it's not going to be, a lot of that will be in the unconscious, and a lot of that will be in a blind spot.
Yeah.
And you'll be dealing with like the surface level symptoms. So for example, it could be an affair, right? Or it's like, I don't know, that's usually like the big one, isn't it? Someone leaves someone else, or I don't know, something happens. They'll be like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
Self, that might be like someone gets cancer, you know, and that's the thing that we think is a symptom, or that's the surface symptom that's showing up in a relationship. But actually it's the surface symptom of a much, much deeper problem that's going on. And then we can kind of hyperfixate on that surface symptom. But as we start kind of going and doing like the healing journey behind the issues, it's like there's a lot in there. So I think that would be the first thing I say, that there's like a lot to sift through.
And that it takes time, doesn't it? When there's that much to sift through, it's just like anything else in life where there's stuff to sift through. It takes time to work your way through it.
Yeah. And that's pain. It's painful work.
It is painful.
Really painful work. So I think that first, like, you need to have two people that are willing to do the work, that are willing to commit to doing the work together, or at least trying, you know, at least, like, for me, the first, like, absolute first thing is get couples therapy. Like, getting couples therapy for my husband and I was the best thing we have ever done. Like, one of the best things we've ever done. And like, what amazes me about humans is how, like, even when everything's falling apart, we still don't invest in help. Like, it blows my mind. I'm like, your marriage is falling apart. Your relationship is absolutely terrible. Still, oh, I can't afford it. I can't afford it.
There's not enough time for it.
There's no time, there's no money, right? As like, dude, like, the cost, there's a cost of, like, there's a short-term cost of investing in therapy, for example, but there's a very, very long-term cost of not, you know? So it's like, it amazes me. So it's like at least having to start to address there's an issue, but you've got to have two people that are willing to at least start, to at least attempt to do the work together and start to work it out. And I think sometimes what I see is at that point when it's like the relationship is maybe already broken down, like sometimes at least one of the partners, maybe one partner wants to do the work, but the other partner is like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, it's gone too far, like too little, too late. And so I think that that's the first thing, is two people have got to be committed to do the work on themselves, like each individually and together.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes if you haven't gone past the point of no return, one person changing can actually induce the other person to change with them. But it seems to me that there is, for some couples, and I think it was the case with myself, my ex-husband, because we had gone past the point of no return.
Right.
And, well, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I was always a problem from his point of view.
Right.
And I was starting to think, yeah, he's probably both of us were the problem. But then actually identifying what in me was the problem, that was a really hard part. It's easy to see what's wrong with him, but for me to say, oh, now I'm starting to understand. And I didn't really understand that until I got with my current partner, Mark. So, and just looking back, as it was hindsight, it's so easy. But for you, Laurie, you stayed with the same guy and you've done all of that work in the same relationship. And that's so cool.
It's very cool. But the thing is that, well, one is that I was unhappy, you know, for a long time in that relationship. It was good. I married a very nice guy, good guy, like great dad. He's an amazing man. But I wasn't happy. You know, I wasn't fulfilled and my needs were not met. But I did not know how to ask for my needs to be met. I didn't know how to meet my own needs. Like there were so many blind spots. There was so much that was missing. And I developed a process. Part of my, I teach something called, money manifestation mastery, or basically how to create in your life guided by your heart, body, and soul. And so my inner guidance system, my wealthy wisdom, or the soul's guidance, whatever you want to call it, guided me through this process. My hardwiring, self-protection, trauma, etc., was on shutdown and lockdown, and was the kind of, like I said, kind of one for out the door in this kind of rejection and rejection, projection, and protection. And my wealthy wisdom, my inner guidance, my heart's consciousness was like, this relationship's not done. That's what guided me through. It was like you, and literally guided me into connection. And in our relationship, because I had more kind of overt trauma, or my trauma was more like, it was a little bit more evident. I was the problem, right? But it wasn't really until we got into couples therapy that our therapist helped us to see that we actually had mirroring wounds. That Joby also had trauma. He'd also experienced things that were creating it was affecting our intimacy. It was affecting our ability to really come together and work together. It was it's like chicken and egg. Who's starting it? It's this dance between two people. But what I've started to call wound on wound, right? Where actually your wounds can attract you towards each other. Or like, I think it's called trauma bonding, where like there's this kind of mirroring of a wound or mirroring of a trauma. And that can create a magnetism and attraction, but it can also be the place where you can't meet each other because it becomes like this wall.
Yes.
Right. And so this was the bit that we couldn't see and didn't know then, that I now know. That there was this place, and he could see and I couldn't see. And it was just like a lot of kind of going into patterns of protection that created separation, that was creating a mismatch, like both of our needs not being met, and having different needs, not knowing how to communicate those needs, etc., etc. So there's quite a lot. But that was the thing that was so powerful to realize. There was a mirroring of wounds that we couldn't see. And that was the work that we started to do, is trying to understand where the mirror was. And I think this is the place that I'm endlessly fascinated in, that, like, as within, so without, right? As within, so without. So where does this live within? So this thing that I can see out, where does it live within? What is going on with the wounding? What's going on with the kind of trauma attraction, if you will? And
it's almost like there's two sets of mirrors. There's the trauma mirror, the wound mirror between the two of you, and there's the outside mirroring the inside.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
I mean, it gets quite complicated because we're in a big blind spot when we're down in there, right? And we're like the blind leading the blind. But yeah, and it does take some unpicking, but it's to kind of understand that whatever the pain or the wound or the challenge is within the relationship is like, where is the mirror of that inside of myself? And it's not necessarily a direct one, but even, again, each relationship will be unique and different. But let's say it was like me not getting kind of the attention that I needed or desired, or my love language, which is like quality time and presence, wasn't being met. So it felt like a rejection, or it felt like my need not being met. And then I had to go inside and be like, where am I not meeting myself? Right? Where am I not, I call it receiving, like, where am I not receiving that thing that I'm wanting from him that I'm not getting? I'm in a sort of lack and scarcity. Where does that live inside of me? Where am I actually rejecting myself? Where am I unable to receive? And what's that about, right?
Yeah.
And this is where I found that some of the dynamics that were playing out with my husband were also the dynamics that played out with my mom.
Which is hardly surprising, really, is it? I mean, yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I married my mom. It looks like my dad. In some ways, like, not exactly, right? But it was like a pattern. It was a dynamic. It was like, oh my goodness, wow, the same dynamic, the same relationship dynamic where I learned about love, where I learned about intimacy, where I learned about connection, where I learned about whether my needs would or wouldn't be met, right?
Yeah.
I sort of unconsciously reattract the same thing because we're kind of, I think that we are attracted to things where there's a potential for healing, where there's a potential for growth.
Yeah, I would agree. We do. It's almost as if you reproduce the wound in your marriage or your relationship with a hope that you can actually then heal it in that context. And we go into that relationship looking to for all the things that our parents never gave us or couldn't give us. But quite often neither can the person we just married because of that. What do you call it? Wound mirroring, trauma mirroring.
Yeah, there's trauma bonding.
Trauma bond, yeah, all of that stuff. Yeah.
The wound on wound. It's like this mirroring of wounds, or the wounds kind of activate the wounds, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we are unconsciously attracted to the thing that actually hurts.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important. I do quite a lot of work with clients who are manifesting relationships as well, because what you want, sometimes we're attracted to things that aren't actually the right thing.
Yeah.
Or we're attracted to something because something in us knows that this relationship can help us heal or help us evolve or help us grow, which was the case for me with my husband, because I was very, like, I knew I was supposed to be with him. I had this kind of intuition or inner guidance or soul knowing, like when I met him, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be with you. Like it was this real psychic knowing.
Yeah.
And what I didn't know was this would be a relationship was going to completely transform my life and transform the core wounds, the core trauma wounds. And that together we would work through that. And same for him with me, which he didn't know either. But that was the invitation for the relationship. But it took me a long time to understand that's what a relationship can even do. Like I didn't even know that was the thing.
Most of us don't.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean, like, you have to have, I think what's really important, you have to have two people that are willing to do that work together, that are committed to doing that work. Because, I see some people doing all the work and then someone else not. Like you've got to work together.
There has got to be, there has got to be some input from both sides.
Definitely. Yeah, exactly. Like you can't, and that again, it's sort of like not everyone's going to be working at the same pace, but ultimately you need people who are committed fundamentally to doing the work, like on themselves and together. That's also really, really important, because I do see some people doing all these like triple backflips to make a relationship work, but it's just on one side.
Yes.
So
yeah.
You need to be both, I guess, at least a bit committed, or at least willing to try. This is starting.
And I suppose if you go into it and your other half isn't willing, you're going to say, okay, I'll give it a little bit of time, see whether they change their mind, whether they start to see the value of what I'm trying to do. Yeah. And eventually, if they're not prepared to play ball, as it were, then at some point you've got to, I guess, call it to a halt. I don't know.
One of the things that I found, and this is what I started with, and I've done this with a lot of my clients as well, who've created extraordinary results in their relationship, is just starting to do your inner work.
Yeah.
You cannot control someone else. I've tried, it doesn't work. You cannot change someone else. You cannot heal someone else. I've tried all of those things. It doesn't work. Save you a shit ton of time and years, like I've learned the hard way. You can only really shift and change yourself. And then be an invitation to another. And so what I have found is there is huge power. So I'm always doing my inner work. So whatever is showing up, it's any area of my life, my relationship, my finances, my business, my children. I'm always working with everything in my life as a mirror. Something I've learned and trialed and errored and practiced over many, many years. Doesn't mean that everything is, created from you, but it's working within your part of that relationship or your part of that dynamic. And what I've found in my relationship is that when I do the work, the relationship starts to alchemize and transform, and he kind of like comes along with me, or we end up transforming together. So I call it being the leader of your life, being in conscious leadership. in your life or different areas of your life. In this case, in conscious leadership of your relationship, taking radical responsibility for what's showing up and what's going on, which most people do not do, right? And that just leads to more fighting, right? More wars, more problems, right? Everyone's just blaming, attacking. What I found is if we go in and do the work, it doesn't mean that everything is your fault or your responsibility, but we're responsible for how we respond. We're responsible for how we react, and we're responsible for how we act. So I'm always like, okay, holding the vision for the relationship, working on what's coming up. And then like in our relationship, it didn't change overnight. Like there are some things that honestly it took us years to shift and change. But the willingness to do the work and to keep showing up and to keep leaning in and then giving it time and space. So what I would also, I'm saying that because someone right on now the partner might be like, I'm not willing to go to therapy, or I'm not willing to do this, or I'm not willing to do that. But if you start working on yourself, it can shift and change the dynamic over time, I have found.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think also it's a recognition that, like Terry Real is a couples therapist I've done some training with. He says my client is neither him nor her, or her if it's, but it's the relationship is the client. And so in a couple, it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about our relationship.
Yeah.
But of course, a relationship contains two people, actually often contains more than two people, but children, you might have elderly parents or whatever. So, and when you put your relationship first, things look a little bit different.
Yeah. And this is what my husband says, there's like, me and him, and then there's the us. So we talked about the us, which is like the entity that exists between the two people. And that has its own consciousness, actually. It has its own like invitation. So because we're not just islands, right? So there's you and me, and then there's the us, and there's the whole. And that it's almost like it's bigger than the I.
Yes.
It's we.
Yes.
And for me, it's so powerful to tap into the us, or into the relationship, or the consciousness of the relationship, because it can get you out of your own like ego agenda or ego needs, or well, you didn't give me this, or you didn't do that, or the punishment and the reaction and the fight and all the crazy shit that humans do in conflict.
Yeah.
And step out of that into something bigger, something more expanded, which I like to call like heart consciousness, or like your soul's consciousness, or that kind of more kind of expanded version of you that you may not even know about yet. So what the kind of invitation of the relationship is as a vehicle, for me, it's a vehicle for healing, a vehicle for growth, a vehicle for transformation, and a vehicle for evolution.
That's beautiful, actually.
Well, my guidance told me this. My little ego would have self-destructed a long time ago. I would have burnt the houses down a long time ago because of my past programming.
Yeah.
Nurture. I didn't know how to look after. I didn't know what that I didn't know how to do it. We're not taught either. We're not taught how to have happy, healthy, harmonious relationships.
Oh, we're not, are we? All we get is the example set by our parents, and God help us, this is not a good one. So I mean, my parents, they just argued all the time, and all I remember of my childhood, well, not all I remember, but a lot of what I remember is the endless arguments, and me as the like the go-between and the mediator. And
my parents didn't argue. They didn't really argue.
They didn't. I was just thinking that because my parents, they're together until my mother died when she was 58. And my dad remarried, but so they didn't get divorced, in spite of the fact that there was so much conflict in their relationship.
It was interesting. The other day, my 15-year-old daughter, was getting really upset about Joby and I arguing. And I was like, listen, arguing isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, I actually think we have to conflict resolve. And for me, part of working through relationships is being able to work through conflict and work through difference. And so I was like, there's a difference between like shouting and screaming in a kind of a violent way versus having hard and difficult conflict in conversation to try to resolve and try and work through. And to me, they're slightly different things. And what I don't like is toxic positivity, because that's what I grew up with. I grew up with everything be happy, everything be perfect,
Yeah.
everything be lovely. Isn't everything wonderful? My grandmother used to say, isn't everything marvelous, darling? Like this. And I was like, no, it's not marvelous, actually, right? And so as a kid, so I've been quite intense about this. I'm not into toxic positivity. So I will have like hard and difficult conversations that might include anger, that might include jealousy, that might include difficult conversations, right? And working through it together. Because without, you can't problem solve without dealing with problems, right? You have to face problems, face issues, right? Trying to do it, we practice something, we've learned a skill called nonviolent communication. So we work towards trying to have nonviolent communication.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean like we don't like argue sometimes about things. I'm quite a fiery person. So like, but it's trying to do it in a way that's non-violent, and working through that together. But what I saw growing up in my house is my parents didn't argue. They didn't deal with problems. And I think that was one of their biggest problems, is not dealing with problems and wanting everything to be kind of sweet and nice and harmonious and peaceful. I was like, you can't really have peace. You can't have like true peace without really, right, making sure the roots are taken care of.
It's like our parents were like poles apart, because they were not violent. Well, my mother was she was a bit of a smacker, shall we say. But there was no physical violence between my parents. But the arguments never went anywhere. They just went round in endless circles, and they never resolved anything. So neither your parents nor my parents resolved anything. And it's that ability to find a way of, like, you obviously non-violent communication. And for me, it's knowing that if I have something that I'm not happy about or I'm angry about, I'm safe to talk about it, because I can trust him.
Yeah.
That, I can bring it and we can talk about it and we can come to some kind of resolution.
Yeah.
We don't argue because decided we didn't want to argue. We'd had enough of arguing. We'd spent 40 years of our lives arguing. We had enough of that. But
working it through, having uncomfortable
working it through. Uncomfortable conversations, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I say the more you do that, the easier it gets. The first time you do it, it's terrifying.
Exactly. It's kind of like clearing out the loft. If you've been like shoving everything in the loft or the basement, there's a big mess. So like you start filtering it through, and then it's easier to clean out. What I found with our conflict when we've had, I mean, honestly, it's taken me so long to figure this stuff out. And one of the ones that's really helped us is understanding love languages. That's been one of them. Understanding what our love languages were different. So how I expressed and received love is different. How he expressed and received love, that was a huge thing. Very simple, but very powerful. And the other was about needs, understanding what our needs were and unmet needs, and learning how to ask for what we need, learning how to communicate our needs in a non-violent way. And honestly, it's like the simplest thing, but what I had to first understand was like, what are my needs, right? What are they? And how do I ask for them? And I didn't know how to do either of those things because it was too vulnerable. I hadn't been trained in that, growing up. That was a skill or a muscle that was never developed. So I learned all sorts of unhealthy ways to get my needs met, right? And unhealthy ways to kind of communicate my needs that were, really not good, not healthy. I call it like hide and seek or push pull or like playing games, like, or manipulation, like all these really messy, entangled ways to try and get my needs met, which never ever work. So you're in this constant like cycle of like, it's almost like a predestined failure, because if I was like, it was like playing out this loop from my past. It never worked when I was a little girl. I don't know why I thought it was going to work later, right? This patterns of behavior didn't work ever, but it was like that was the only way I knew how to get my needs met. So that's been another really, really powerful piece, is to feel safe enough to get vulnerable enough, but to get honest enough to know what my needs were and ask what they are, which are sometimes something like, I need to be held. Like, can you hold me? I had no idea I had no idea how to tap into that or ask for that, for example.
And it's interesting because I'm wondering how many people out there find it hard to ask for that. And it's such a fundamental thing. Lara, I'm aware of the time, and I'm thinking there may be some people who want to ask questions. And would this be a good time to sort of close the conversation and open up to questions?
Yeah, I would just like to say that for anyone who's listening, right? This is, it's a big body of work working on, healing relationships, transforming trauma through relationships, and, get help, get support.
Yes.
Don't expect to do this on your own. That's what I would say. And also start within. Start by working on yourself. That's the one thing you can control. That's the one thing you can do. And you're gonna need to have your hand held through it, because we all have blind spots. We're all carrying a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of hurt and harm that you may not even be aware of. They're in big blind spots. So you need a lot of patience, love, and compassion, and one step at a time. And it's gonna be messy and it's gonna be imperfect. And just to kind of bear that in mind. We've been fed so much BS when it comes to relationships. Thank you, Disney. Thank you.
Disney in the popular song.
Soulmates and true love and all that stuff. It's the reality of creating a healthy, happy, harmonious relationship is way messier than that. So we haven't been taught the skills. Like, we need to go and learn and unlearn. And so that's what I would like to close on.
I think it's a very good place to close. Thanks, Laura. I'm going to stop the recording.